Hi, friends. Welcome back to That's Comical, where we talk about all things comics, manga, and graphic formats. Today, we are going to be talking about what we know as the manga boom in the industry and what that's doing to the future of comics. Today, I am here with my fellow hosts, Steve and April. We're very excited to be discussing this topic, and I'm so excited to dive in. Being a manga nut myself, and only coming into it in my adulthood, I think this is a really fun topic to discuss. So,
You know,
okay.
I guess I'll just jump in and say hello, everybody.
Yes, everybody say hello.
Yeah,
That's a
yes,
good place to start.
Of course. Hello, everybody, and I'm actually glad that I'm here with my colleagues here because it happens to be Wednesday. So happy New Comic Book Day to you all. I'm really excited today because of the fact that even though I am a very big respecter of manga, I am really more of an anime person slash instead of a manga reader, but I know that there's so many people that read manga, and I keep hearing so many things about so many different genres in manga. But as someone who has been a big fan of Western comics, this is really me trying to get a little bit of a learning experience, if you will, from people who I know and people who I trust in their judgment for many a years, rather than just hearing what the talking heads are saying in the mainstream channels of YouTube and the comic book and manga community. So, ladies, I'm really excited to hear your thoughts, and I'm also hoping that you guys are ready to listen to some of my thoughts as well.
Of course. So there, April, do a quick introduction, and then there is something I specifically want to discuss when it comes to this.
Sure.
Of course. I'm April, and I'm here because I was told there'd be snacks. I'm expecting snacks.
I just ate my big red velvet.
I can't bring snacks through the computer, and I'm cooking meatloaf downstairs, not cookies. I'm sorry.
But no, really, I'm here because, manga has been part of my life for, a good handful of my years. I'm not going to admit how many, and then comics have entered my life, and it's an interesting dynamic now that we see more of the influence coming onto the scene, leaning more the direction of what I grew up in compared to what I'm starting to get into.
Mm-hmm. And that's something I wanted to bring up, because one thing we're seeing right now, even in the booktube space, is manga. Manga has the big booktubers are starting to talk about manga now. And I feel a sort of way about that, I have to be honest. And the thing is, what they're doing is very irresponsible to future collectors, because a lot of what they're doing is they're buying entire series at once without reading them. So there was someone recently who bought all of One Piece, which is over 100 volumes in the US, blind. They did not read any of it before they bought it all.
That's
intense.
intense.
And this has happened with multiple other series.
And they never even watched the anime?
They went in completely blind. And I'm like, you can't encourage that kind of behavior because, one, kids watch booktube. Like, you can't expect a kid to go out and expect their parents to buy an entire 100-volume series for them. That's like almost $1,000 right there. It's a lot. Yeah. So absolutely. The way that booktube is talking about manga isn't very responsible, and that's why I feel a sort of way about it, because they're trying to experience these older series, but because they're adults and they have the means, they're doing it in a way that isn't really responsible. I mean, I've been a collector just through my adult years, but I've still been very responsible about it. Yes, I buy a lot, but I'm not buying entire series blind. I at least have experienced the anime or know something about it before I'm buying a box set. Like,
yeah. And I think that that's what I find so interesting about the comic book community on YouTube, because my personal experience in comics is when I was young, started when I was 9 years old. A friend of mine told me to start reading some comics because he was reading comics, and I started, basically buying the usual superheroes that everybody knew. I started with X-Men, moved to Spider-Man, went to comic book characters like Batman and Superman. But the funny thing was the years that I was collecting was in the 1990s, and that was during a big speculator period when people were basically like buying tons of these new #1 issues, or these big landmark issues. Like a big one at the time was Superman issue 75, which was the death of Superman, a big thing.
Mhm.
But because it was so overproduced and people were just constantly buying all of these #1s, they thought that people were going to be able to save all this money and like pay off a mortgage on a house or get money to save for their kids' college funds. And because of the overproduction and all the speculation, it eventually would crash and all of these new books would be worth absolutely nothing. And the thing that I'm trying to get at is nobody was buying comics for the sake of reading the comics. And I'm not going to deny the fact that to a certain degree, I was part of that, but not an extreme part of that. But I do remember buying a lot of #1s. Fast forward to 2019, when I knew I always had respect for comic books, loved all this stuff, but I really wanted to finally really get into the books that I owned and then catch up on some of the stories that were taking place when I wasn't reading comics, and even maybe going a little further back in time, because I also used to collect cards of comic book characters. And that was how I gained my knowledge. That's how I knew every superhero. I knew their powers. I knew their last names and first names. I knew their first appearances. And that's also how I started to learn about some of the classic stories. So I said to myself, hopefully one day I'll read them. So in 2019, when I actually had the money and I wanted to start backtracking, I started reading some of those stories, and they were wonderful. And then I started taking a look at, will I consider going forward and starting getting the stuff that's coming out now, but not for the sake of collecting, but rather for the sake of just reading good stories, because I follow the authors and I follow the artists and to a certain degree, sometimes the characters themselves. But I guess what's interesting about the comic book industry right now is because there's so much history and lore out there, it's an intimidating place for people to go because they just don't know where to start. And I know for a solid fact that unless you are a billionaire, you are not going to be able to get every single comic book that Superman's been in, going all the way back to Action Comics #1. You can't do that. But
just like with certain manga series that are out of print, you're going to pay $500 for a single volume. Like that's just how collecting things that are out of print go.
Exactly. But I think the most important thing is about the comic book community here is that they want to be a guiding light for new readers. So they actually have plenty of videos out there telling you, here's a good place to jump on. And if it's something old, there's a very good chance that you can get an affordable trade paperback. Or if you have the extra money and you want to splurge, buy an omnibus. There's one omnibus that I would love to get one day, and it's definitely way out of my price range right now. I think it could range anywhere from $100 to $200, but I would love to get the entire Phoenix and Dark Phoenix saga by Chris Claremont. It's one of the most well-known X-Men stories. It's the one X-Men story that I currently have never read that is known as one of the greatest. So one day I know I'll get my hands on that. But in regards to manga, I am just fascinated by how it is growing and the fact that it took such a long time for a medium that has been in this side of the world for quite a number of years now. But all of a sudden, it suddenly took off. So I would love to know from the both of you, specifically because you are my friends and I know who you are and I know what you like, why is that? Is it because of the intimidation of the comic book market, or is it because of something else?
April, go ahead.
The people who grew up reading them or trying to read them now have money. And so we're fighting to get the thing that we really loved into the mainstream so that we don't have to hunt down in dark back alleyways for really bad translations. Because that was the pitfall of my teenage and preteen years, is trying to find these stories and having to go through some illegal means sometimes because it wasn't something that a lot of people were reading. And then we had the explosion of the internet, and we found our people, we found our tribe, and then we started raising our voices saying, hey, I like to read this. And Barnes and Noble heard that, and they started a small little section, and it started to grow. And then we had BookTube come into popularity, and then we had our little niche market of manga tubers who are like, hey, look at all the stuff. These are all really cool. Let's bring some more over here. Let's see what we can do. And then publishers starting to take note. And like I said, it's us who now have money. We are now of age to have money. And so we're influencing the younger generations by bringing it to the market.
The other thing that happened is the pandemic. Because during the pandemic, Netflix was smart and they had a lot of anime on their backlist. And so people like me used anime as their comfort shows to get through the crap show that was our world. And because of that, more parents became open to the idea of their kids reading manga because they realized how densely text heavy some of these series are, and that it really is reading for their kids. And that's what their kids want to read. So smart parents who know better are letting their kids read it. Sometimes they read it before to screen it for them to make sure they feel it's safe for their kid, because there are people who want to censor what their kids intake, and that's a parenting choice. We're not getting into that discussion tonight. But anyways, with manga specifically, because of the way certain people are drawn and stuff, parents feel certain ways, especially where I live in the conservative state of Utah. Like, people feel a certain way about it. And so they're going to ask questions of me, the bookseller, being like, hey, is this appropriate for a kid about this age? I said, well, it's going to have this, this, and this in it. As long as you're cool with your kid intaking that, then you're usually fine. So, but I do think the pandemic played a huge part, because since 2019, 2020, year over year, manga sales have gone up 500% or more.
That's crazy.
It is insane, the amount that it's grown. And I think it will continue to do that because there is a lot of appeal in just the Eastern way of storytelling that a lot of people didn't experience until more recently. And I do think that the way the stories are being told is different than what a Western audience is used to. So it feels new and fresh and a little less intimidating than diving into hundreds and hundreds of volumes of superhero characters. Yeah, I do think there are some companies out there who are smart about that kind of stuff. People like Image. I mean, their stuff is buy one, get one free at Barnes for the rest of the month. Go get your comics, y'all. Go do it. But it's one of those things where some of those smaller indie companies are getting really smart. I mean, Del Rey is really smart because they picked up Lore Olympus and they're giving you beautiful editions of it, even though you can read it all for free on the freaking internet. Mm-hmm. But someone like me who's been reading it from the beginning is going to want every edition of it.
Yeah, you guys also mentioned something very important. You also mentioned the BookTube community. And the interesting thing about the BookTube community was when I started watching BookTubers, and of course when I found you guys, there was one specific thing that I was actually noticing. And I'm really upset that it took me such a long time because nobody told me that this one specific comic that practically everybody in the BookTube community was reading. Of course I'm talking about Saga. No one told me it was an Image book because I was... I
don't think people were paying attention to that in BookTube because they didn't understand how new of a company they were.
Because I am an Image advocate, and Image has just celebrated their 30th anniversary. And I know that you mentioned small indie, but Image isn't small indie anymore. It's the big indie right now. Exactly. But Saga, and I finally picked up the volumes, and now I'm all cut up, and I'm just like, holy cow, this is something that I've never experienced before in comics. You know, this is science fiction, this is a romance, this got a lot of comedy in it. I love the fast paced. I love how you have to pay attention to everything that you're looking at, otherwise you're going to miss something. The art is so unique. The characters are completely outlandish. It reminded me of The Fifth Element, which is one of my favorite films of all time. And I'm just absolutely surprised that they were talking about Saga, but yet that was as far as they went in regards to comics.
There are a few that went a little further. Like, that's how I found out about Alex and Ada, was back in that era of BookTube.
That was another one I kept hearing about.
So that was another one that was also Image that was going around at the time. And I think people felt okay jumping in because either they were brand new or, you know, like they had heard it was good. And I think that's as far as it really went. A lot of them didn't explore further, others did.
Yeah, because the thing about Image books, and not just the Image name itself, but one of the other things that made me really happy when I revisited the world of comics was finding out about all of these other indie companies that are now pretty well-known names. I mean, Boom Studios is very well known for mainstream comics like the Power Rangers books, but also one of the most popular books from their library is James Tynion's Something is Killing the Children. Everybody loves that book. It's not my cup of tea, but I can see why everybody likes that. But seeing what these companies are offering, what I like is they're not creating thousands and thousands of issues. There are very few series that they have that are called ongoings. It's not like a Superman.
Yeah,
it's not like a
they're much more
Batman,
in like short runs. Something like Twig was a short run.
which I
I
love.
could have lived in this world for a while. Like, it's just right here, so that's why it's in my hand.
Aren't
But,
you
like,
glad that I recommended that to you guys? Don't you want
heck yes,
more of
I
it?
am. Like, if you want to like Fraggle Rock feeling in a comic, like just pick this one up. It'll make you happy.
It's something that we have seen so many times. It's a hero's journey. I won't deny the fact that it's the recycled hero's journey story, but there's so much more to it visually, and the
It's
dialogue
presented
is
the best way
hilarious.
possible.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an adorable story. And I mean, like, April, you read Stray Dogs. That's another great Image book that we got just recently. And even some of the names that have, and even some of the big name books from DC and Marvel, they're creating some mini series with their big characters as well. I mean, one of the things that I am currently noticing is Marvel in particular is really trying to bring back the 90s nostalgia when comics were like red hot. So they're getting big names from the past, like Peter David and Dave Michelini and some of these other names, to go back into some of these 90s stories and bring little mini series of these characters back. I mean, right now, one of my favorites was one of the greatest writers, Peter David, who I just mentioned. He created a 2-issue Incredible Hulk story back in 1993 called Future Imperfect, where the Hulk goes into the future and sees a version of himself who's a brutal dictator who calls himself the Maestro. 2 years ago, he took that story and started a trilogy of 5-issue miniseries. His Maestro trilogy concluded last year. It was so amazing. It was so much fun, tons of action. And I'm like, I'm not getting this kind of storytelling from the current books that are coming out right now with some of the characters that I love. Batman is not being written like that right now. X-Men is not being written like that by now. Not even Spider-Man is being written like that by now. And it's a real upsetting feeling to me, but in a certain way, it's cool because you can tell a young reader, hey, you want to read a little bit about the Incredible Hulk? Read the Maestro trilogy. You want to read a little something about Doctor Strange? Read this really freaky looking book that just came out called Fall Sunrise. It is trippy, but it's so cool to look at. So there are ways for people to start reading some comics and getting a feel for these characters by finding these mini and maxi series, which I am happy about to a certain degree.
Mm-hmm. And there's also like the price difference sometimes between a volume of manga and a trade of a comic that could be a defining factor as well. Because like this trade of Twig is $17 full price, and it's like what, 60-ish pages, maybe a little bit more.
Yep, based on
It's
5
not
issues.
super long.
Mm-mm.
But then you come over here to a volume of manga, the Apothecary Diaries, because it's right here. This one is 13 and over 200 pages. So you're getting more pages and more story, though this is taller, so that can be argued. This is color, this is not. Some manga is full color. I have a full color one right here. Romantic Killer is a full color one where, you pay a little more because it's full color. But I do think price comes into play, especially in the early days of the pandemic.
Yeah.
When people were trying to cut back, they're not going to spend the money on a trade when they can get an equal or more amount of story over here for less money.
That's absolutely true. Now,
so I do think that is part of the boom, because they can justify it, because, you know, they can go someplace like Barnes & Noble where they have that 10% off discount that you pay for, and they're only paying $9 a volume for some of these series. And
well, yeah, and there's
I do think that plays a part.
There's an interesting dynamic that happens in the comic world, because they're usually introduced episodically, where you have issues, and it's only part of the time where you'll get a trade. And it's usually the non-collectors, it's the readers, it's the ones who are used to that full story format that are going for the trades. That's, I think, part of me being who I am, getting into comics. That's, I think, the most intimidating part, is you have to be, if you want to follow a story, you have to be every week keeping track of things or picking up those issues, or it might not be in print ever again. And maybe there wasn't enough support that a trade was never going to be possible. Whereas with manga now, we have this accessibility of, hey, you get a pretty decent, almost movie size episode rather than a 30-45 minute episode that you would get with an issue that just feels more weighty, if that makes sense.
It does, but here's another question that I have. So, as an anime watcher, someone who has seen some very popular names, like, look, Dragon Ball fan, no doubt, love everything, have all of the DVDs of all the series, including the hated GT. Don't care, I have it, and I watch it. So, another question that I have is, someone who watches a lot of these animes, are people actually going to the source material and actually picking up the books? And my question is, what do the mangas have that the animes don't? Because my feeling about anime and manga is, as great as manga is, and someone who has watched a lot of anime in his life, to me, manga, next to Western comics, manga is poetry in motion. I need to see these pictures move. And even though the artistry is very dynamic, I flipped through a few pages. Shay, you've showed me some of these beautiful pictures, but I'm still trying to figure out, you know, what is getting people, even if they already know what's going to happen, like what is in the book that is going to get you to want to read it. Do you know what I'm saying? Do you understand my question?
Yes, I do. And a lot of that happens with, I think this was a change around that same time, is what anime has done is they've started doing shorter seasons.
Right.
They're only doing 12 to 13 episodes at a time, which is about 3 to 4 volumes of a manga. And so they want to keep going. They love what they've seen, and they're like, okay, I want more. So I'm going to start at the beginning and I'm going to read it all, is what a lot of them are doing. Or, you know, their parents had a handful of volumes that they had from their teen/childhood years. They've picked them up and tried it, and they're like, hey, this is cool. I want to go get my own. And that's how that happens. For me, I tend to enjoy my action shonen series. So those are going to be things like Bleach, like Dragon Ball. I prefer the anime versions of those. I can't deny that, because I do think the motion, the music, all of those things fuel the story further, and I think it helps. But in something a little quieter, like The Apothecary Diaries, which is a politically centered story about a girl kind of working in the inner circle, in the inner palace, taking care of like the women of the king's harem, essentially the emperor's harem. And so she's trying to like stop them from poisoning each other, to stop them from killing each other's babies, like something like this that's very political. It doesn't need the movement, you just need the reactions of the people. So you just need to see their faces.
Right.
Like, there's one like right here that's not like super spoilery. I just got to get to it. I'm not sure where it went, but anyways, there a lot can be said with one panel. Where is that Yona volume? This one. Yona of the Dawn is one of my all-time favorites. I will talk about Yona of the Dawn forever. But like,
yeah, you're also doing a live stream series with some friends on it, I believe.
Oh yes. I swear it's in this volume. Where's that panel, dang it? Right here.
Yeah, that's gorgeous. That's absolutely stunning.
You can tell everything she's feeling by looking at her.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm not just saying that.
You don't need the movement for a series like this. And it's these kinds of series that are getting a lot more traction and momentum since the pandemic, because people deep dived YouTube and found people like me, and they deep dived Netflix and found a bunch of anime. And so I think those are some of the really big reasons why manga has boomed so much in the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could go into some of the things that I personally have been hearing in regards to the big question, like, why is it that manga is gaining so much traction and practically driving people away from Western comics, or just not getting them to even try and jump in? Well, there's the typical stuff that people are saying. One of the few things that a lot of people are saying is that, particularly in the big companies, a lot of people are saying that the writers are not really trying to write good stories. They're trying to put in their own personal politics. And there's such a large argument about it, but there's always been politics in comics. Yes, that is very true. But what a lot of people are trying to explain is that when someone is putting their own personal politics, it's not technically classified as politics to many people. And that's what everyone is fighting about right now, and it's kind of annoying. But for me personally, I can see why Western comics are losing a lot of traction and why they're not really gaining any major new readers. I think one of the main reasons why they're losing traction is just because of the fact that, because the world of superheroes has been Hollywoodized, if you will, and there's been so many films and television shows ever since, Christopher Nolan finally decided to make a serious Batman film. I just feel that people are just sick and tired of superheroes right now. They're superheroed out. They're burnt out.
I can't say that's wrong, honestly, because I know that I'm superheroed out.
Yeah.
Well, and that was something I was going to mention is, I think, at least in the Western world right now, comics, when you hear the word comics, I mean, I automatically think of DC and Marvel and superheroes, and automatically I'm like, there's nothing there that I relate to, which is why initially when I was younger, I started trying to find manga, because they were telling these stories that I enjoyed. They were telling the Supergirl kind of stories. They were telling
Magical
the romance
stories.
That's
a real thing.
Yeah. And part of I had another thought that I was, as you guys were talking, that I was starting to put together, and I have now officially lost it.
Well, if we keep talking, maybe your train will get back on track and you can immediately jump back in when you think about it.
But another thing I wanted to bring up is that I feel like comics is a harder sell for a traditional girly girl. I'm wording this very specifically for a reason, because I know there are plenty of girls out there who love all sorts of comics, and I'm not trying to say that they don't and they don't read them. But I think for someone like me who wants a lot of love in my stories, I'm not going to find that ever in a DC or a Marvel. Because a lot of those relationships are like toxic or very one-sided. And so they don't portray relationships in a positive way, in a way that I would enjoy. But for me, I can go to manga and find it all over the freaking place.
Yeah, it's actually so funny that you mentioned it because I just read my new comics for the week, and my favorite issue of the week was one from one of my favorite current lines on DC. It's Batman Superman World's Finest. It's a story in between the two action-packed story arcs. It was the story of Robin and Supergirl going on a date and how it went horribly wrong. I can see where a girly girl would not find fun in that, but a guy like me was laughing his head off because these are superheroes in their costumes, no doubt, going on a date at a fancy restaurant. Like, this is something that I am just head over heels laughing about, you know? But
right.
I can see exactly what you're saying. And I think the other problem is currently the stories are in the big two companies, because I know that we talked about graphic novels and stuff like that. They're sort of trying to write them like mangas, and they're just getting it all wrong because they're trying to write the stories for the purpose of making the bind up.
Okay,
yeah, and that triggered my thought. I think we are so used to our style of storytelling that we feel we've heard the same stories over and over and over and over, and they've been told the same kind of way with the same kind of tropes, that when we get something from another culture and we keep the essence of that translation of that, it feels new and it feels different, and it's not something that has been experienced before. And I think that's why we're seeing a little bit of a swing this direction, because with any kind of new thing, you're going to get flooded. The market is going to get flooded because they see that's where all the money's at.
Currently, manga is the new shiny. Everybody wants to have a bite of it.
We might get to the point where we're like, okay, yeah, I've read this kind of story before. I kind of know where it's going to go. It's not that new anymore. And maybe we see a swing in another direction. But I think that is part of the pandemic plus that we got, is like, this is different. I need something different to take my mind off of things. And I've never experienced this before.
Yeah, and also another thing where the Western comics are really going in a bad direction is that every single month there's a crossover event. You know, when I was growing up, the event was a big thing. That wasn't something that you saw like every month. That was something that you saw like maybe every 2 or 3 years. But now there's an event after event after event, and sometimes there's 2 events taking place at the same time. And these events are just turning out to be horrible. They're sometimes, if anything, they are mediocre at best. And this is once again coming from the big two. Because you take a look at the early 2000s when Jeff Johns was like the it child of DC Comics, and he was building the story that would eventually become probably one of the greatest comic book crossovers of all time, and that was Green Lantern's Blackest Night. The stories that took place throughout 2005 to 2008, how there would be these small events, but the events would have those little nuggets of something big that's going to happen somewhere down the line. So you got your audience and you've got them hooked because they're going to continue reading and they're going to continue to see how this story evolves, so that when they finally reach the point where the big story begins, they're going to be ready, they're going to be excited, and they're going to read that book all the way to the end, and they're going to buy all the tie-ins as well. These days, nobody is excited for anything. And I'm not going to deny the fact that I have picked up some of these events because I'm a fan. These are the characters that I grew up with. This is my childhood. But to walk away from some of these stories just being disappointed to the point where I actually want to take one of those comics and tear it up, that's really sad. And once again, I'm not saying that all comics are doing this. Eventually, I want to talk a little bit about the indie books, but it's really Marvel and DC because, once again, these are characters that I know. These are characters that I love. And even when characters are celebrating anniversaries, like it's a big year this year. It's the 60th anniversary of the X-Men, and it's the 60th anniversary of the Avengers. And they're trying to celebrate these big milestones, but nobody is showing any love or support. And on top of that, the old fans are really sad that they have this attitude because they feel that right now, these people who are creating the current stories from these beloved characters, they're not writing stories for their fans. They're trying to get a new audience that they keep believing is there, but it's not. Now, don't get me wrong. There are new comic readers every day. The best way for a new comic book reader to start reading comics is either have a series of friends or even just one friend who's been reading and can guide you in the right direction, or go to your local comic book store and ask the person who's managing the store, because their job is to listen to what you're looking for and suggest what would be good for you. And there are not that many comic store owners or managers that act that way, but the ones who do are the ones that are not afraid of their comic shops closing down right now. And Shay, as someone who works in Barnes & Noble, I'm sure that you can understand exactly what I'm discussing here right now.
Yeah, because the whole point of a bookseller at Barnes & Noble is to get the customer to the book they want and to recommend things so that they're getting what they need. The amount of times I am called over to the comic and manga section is kind of ridiculous because there are a lot of people that work at my store that aren't well read in those areas, but I am. And so because I am, I get over there and I get asked a lot of things. When it comes to a lot of the DC Marvel stuff, I can just point out where it is to people. But when it comes to like what issue and whatnot, unless they're very specific with me, I have a harder time finding it because of the way the trades are and the way our store organizes them, because we organize by publisher and then alphabetical by title. So for us, we do have a separate Image and Boom Studios section, which has been a more recent addition, which I love. But it's one of those things where I like, even if like the bookseller doesn't understand what the person is asking for in the manga department, because it's like two names. Like I get called over for Sasaki and Miyano, which is a boys' love story. I get called over to the department for that all the time because they don't understand what the person is asking for. Like they just can't understand it because it's Japanese names. And so they're like, what are you saying? And so they're like, hey, Shay, can you come over to manga? And so I go over to manga and I help them. And I'm like, oh, yeah, it's right here. You know, if you like this, try this one too, because it's also really good. And the amount of times the parents are just like, I don't know what to get my kid, but they love manga. I'm like, okay, what have they already read? What's their age? What's their gender? And I kind of try to point them in the right direction because manga demographics are broken down by gender, which is something that's also very different. So typically ones that are geared towards women or girls are going to be more romance forward, but not always. And then most of the ones geared towards men are not going to be as romance forward. They tend to have a little more action, some things like that. So it's just very interesting, the fact that people just don't know what to do either way, it feels like.
Yeah, there's always got to be a guide. You've got to have a guide that does know their stuff. I mean, that's one of the few things I feel like a successful comic store is a place where the manager is a comic reader. And I think what's really funny is at my local store, I love it. It's just a good group of people. The customers that come, you know, I just personally love the fact that when I go to the comic book store, you know, the average person that is going to the comic book store to get their books is someone that ranges from like age 30 to age 60. I kind of love the fact that my age demographic is the major reader of comic books right now. It really makes me happy to know that we're still reading this stuff and there's still great stuff that we can collect. And a lot of the stores right now, because of the fact that a lot of the current new books are not selling as well as they used to, another thing the comic book stores are doing is they're really trying to bulk up on back issues. Like, they want to make sure that if someone's going to want to look for a good old story, that they can actually have it in stock. So it's like, if someone's looking for an old Spider-Man story or an old Green Lantern story from like the 80s or 90s, there's a very good chance that a good comic book store is going to have it. But I think one of the greatest things that I once saw was that a mother and her son came to the comic book store when I was picking up my books one day, and the boy must have been about 11 years old. And he goes up to the guy who runs my store and he says, "Hi, I've never read comics before, but I'd really like to try starting. Can you recommend me something?" And so he goes, "Well, let me ask you one question. Who's your favorite superhero?" He says, "I'm assuming you've probably seen a Marvel movie or two." He goes, "Yeah." And so he goes, "Well, who's your favorite superhero?" He goes, "I like Thor." And so he goes, "Okay, how old are you?" And so he gives him his age. And then he says, "Okay." So he goes to where all the Thor trades are and he picks out a book for him. He goes, "I think this is perfect for you, for your age." He says, "Have you seen Thor Love and Thunder yet?" He said, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, this is where Gore the God Butcher first comes in. He's a character from the new Thor movie." So the fact that he recommended something that the boy already knew from the movies, he says, "Here's how it was originally shown in the comics." So I like that, you know? If I was part of a comic book store, I would do that too. But I also like the culture that the store has, because the people that go to the store and the people that run the store, they'll talk about everything and anything from politics to their favorite flavor of pie, you know? So it's just like, it's the culture, I feel, that's keeping the Western comics alive, because it's just like-minded people. It's like you said, Shane April, we found our people through the internet when we were trying to hunt down comics and anime. And I feel that that's also what keeps both of these cultures thriving. But it's just like, manga, from what I'm seeing, is just exploding because, like you said, we're looking for something fresh and we're looking for something new. And right now, the big names in comics are not giving us that. And if they're trying to do that, they're failing miserably because they're trying to cater to this new group of people who's buying all the manga. But the people who are buying all the manga, trust me, they're not coming to your store to buy the comics. They're not going to the comic store to buy the comics.
There are a few people like me who read both. They're far and few between, though.
Yep.
One thing I want, and I feel like I have to bring up, since you were talking so lovingly about your local comic store, I have a really nice local comic store near me, but I have had some very uncomfortable experiences there with customers. It's never been the staff, it's always been the customers. And women do hesitate to go into local comic shops because of these experiences.
Exactly.
Because, you know, there are some men who are single who don't expect to see women in comic book stores, especially in a conservative state like mine.
It's like that scene
when I
from
go
the Big
in,
Bang
I'm like
Theory.
the holy grail, so I have to very much use my hands to talk, so they're seeing my ring and leaving me alone.
It's that scene from the Big Bang Theory when Penny, Bernadette, and Amy walked into the comic book store and all the men stopped what they were doing and said, "What are women doing in this store?" To the point where Stuart said, "I will use the hose on you, I swear to God." But that's what's different from the comic book store that I go to, because there's a very diverse group of people that go there. A lot of the guys that are there are mostly married and they're bringing their kids, which I think is so cute. And I also think that one of the nice things is that one of the people that works at my store is actually a female, and she's actually someone that's never read comics, but because she's there, she's talking to the customers and she's starting to learn things. And because of that, she's actually starting to, like, she knows the characters, so she's actually starting to pick up a book here or two and just read it. And so, but that's what's so funny, because like you said, you're absolutely right. There are stores like that. I mean, the store that I used to go to when I was a little kid, it was actually owned by a woman. So it was definitely a very different kind of atmosphere, but I'm not trying to go into those specific topics, but that's the problem. The problem with Western comics is it's been open for everyone, but it really has been sort of like a boys. It's been a boys' club. It has been a boys' club pretty much since the 1950s, when the Silver Age started, and it was all superheroes all the time. But I think that that's one of the most interesting things about comics right now, where the indie companies are trying to save it by trying to bring in different genres and not really focusing on the superheroes. I think one of the most amazing things that's currently happening in comics right now, thanks to the indie comics, is they're bringing back horror and they're creating thriller books, because these were topics that you saw in comics back in the 40s, before the comics code and angry parents basically saying, why are my children reading books of people getting their heads chopped off, But it's making a comeback in so many different ways. And the companies like Image and Boom Studios, and even companies like Scout Comics or Aftershock or Dynamite, they're not just creating non-superhero stories, they're also companies that are doing something that Marvel and DC are not doing because they don't have to. And that is, these companies are buying licenses, which is why you get Power Rangers comics, which is why you have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle comics, Transformers comics, G.I. Joe comics, Jim Henson character comics.
Which is exactly how manga works. They cannot publish it here without the license for it. And they have a separate physical license and a separate digital license. So some companies have gone digital first to make sure it does well enough. And once it reaches a certain threshold, they'll buy the physical license.
Yeah.
Well, if you want to hear a kind of interesting little flash from the past, reverse story here. To get manga years ago, you had to go to a comic book store. And not only that, they were trying to push it out like comics. And they put it in issues in the larger formats. And that was the stage in which I entered manga, and where my first experiences with comic book stores came into play. And they weren't always good, especially since I was a young girl trying to get manga from a comic book store. And it's interesting how when they were first trying to bring manga over, they were trying to westernize it into comics.
Yeah.
But now we have this play of, no, let's leave it as it is. And we've got comics trying to switch over to kind of manga storytelling.
Exactly.
And I do have to say, I think horror is having a rise in comics because horror manga sells so well.
Oh,
horror
yeah,
manga
that's
is
right.
a huge thing, where Viz has an indefinite license with the creator Junji Ito, who does some of the most horrific horror manga in the space. He is the king of horror manga. And because of things like that, I think more companies are willing to take risks on horror stories because they realize their audience actually wants it.
Well, that's why I am so excited for April to roll around, because I am really excited for Dark Horse's Hairball, because this is apparently Junji Ito meets Hayao Miyazaki. So I'm really excited to read it. And also because of the fact it's only 4 issues, and it's being written by a writer who I know very well, Matt Kent. He has written a couple of books that I have read over the last couple of years. And when I saw the cover of Hairball issue number 1, it's literally a picture of a tiny gray kitten sitting in front of a purple ball of yarn. I'm like, I don't know what this is going to be about, but they mentioned, again, 2 people from the East that I know Miyazaki. I know who Junji Ito is. I never read any of this stuff, but I know who that is. I know how popular he is, and I love Hayao Miyazaki. So I'm just like, I'm going to check this out because this is going to be good because I know the writer, and I know he's not going to disappoint me either. So that's something that's really grabbing me. I mean, like, I think another one of my favorite stories that I've read recently was Donny Cates' Baby Teeth from Aftershock. That was such a great story, which looks, and that's one of those perfect examples of don't judge a book by its cover, because it looks like a horror story and it's got horror elements in it, but it really is a story about love and family, which is what I was absolutely shocked by. And it's 20 issues, but I absolutely loved it. And I'm loving it because Batman doesn't give me this. Spider-Man doesn't give me this. Now, granted, the stories that I've been talking about from the big 2, particularly Superman, Batman, World's Finest, I love that one so much because it's, first of all, it's written by Mark Waid, who's one of my favorite comic book writers of all time, but also because he's capturing what everybody loves about Superman and Batman. He's giving you fun, classic comic stories. That's what appeals to the old school comic book fan. And that's also a series that I would seriously tell someone who's never read a Batman or Superman comic in their lives. I'm like, you know about Superman. You know who Superman is. You know who Batman is. So forget about all of that stuff. Just read one of their adventures and just have a good time with this. You'll have fun. And that's one of the things that a lot of Western comics readers, especially from the big 2, are seeing a lot of dissatisfaction. They're not having fun with what they're reading, especially because of the fact that they're noticing an interesting theme going around. I don't know if this is a manga theme or not, but nobody likes comic books with your favorite superheroes just sitting around eating and talking, because apparently that's what a lot of current Western comics are featuring right now. They're not giving you action, particularly the ongoing titles.
That would fall into a certain category of manga, which I would call slice of life, where you're just kind of glimpsing someone's life for a certain period of time. So that is a Japanese trope that they use a lot in books, in manga, in various forms of their storytelling. But it's probably what they're actually talking about that's the problem, more than that they're just sitting and talking.
Yeah.
Because you're just sitting there making crass jokes. Of course, people are going to be upset about that. But if they're actually having an in-depth and deep discussion, that's going to be a totally different thing for most fans.
Right. No, it's just that's what a lot of people are complaining about. There's no action in comics anymore, and that's what everybody's really upset about. But again,
and see, give me a good slice of life anytime. Slice of life, it's kind of like Whispers of the Heart by Ghibli. That's a definition of a slice of life.
It's a great one too.
Exactly. I'm like, I can use this example because I know you've seen that one. I was like, wait, which one's is she seeing again? But anyway, so yeah, it's just a slice of life situation. And slice of life is one of my favorite areas to read because usually the art is extra stunning. They take their time telling their story, and it's just a beautiful piece that I usually end up crying by the end, and I like emotional things. So
yeah, but I mean, like, I've read some really great comics over the last couple of years, especially on the indie circuit. Like, I loved this 5-issue series of a book called Shadow Doctor, which was actually based on a true story of an African-American doctor in the 1930s who was trying to open up a practice, and he couldn't because he was Black. And apparently he ends up being found by notorious gangster Al Capone, and he pays him to be his secret doctor. I thought that was an amazing story. I read this book called Nuclear Family, which is basically about a nuclear blast in the 1950s that sends this family forward in time to an alternate reality. It was actually based on a Philip K. Dick short story, which I also really thought was cool. And then, of course, I read books like Stray Dogs, and then I read Twig, and I've read all of these other great ideas. And again, I also feel that that's the problem with Western comics right now, because the big two are never going to give you those kinds of stories. And the problem is they have practically saturated the market, which is why you're never going to see these indie books. I mean, you'll see Image, though. You will see Image because everybody knows Spawn. That's the big name in Image Comics. And that's pretty much the only superhero book.
It's funny because I don't hear people talk about Spawn. I hear people talk about Saga and Monstrous when they're talking about Image.
Oh, yeah, Monstrous too. But no, I mean, Spawn, what was interesting about Spawn was before the pandemic, Spawn reached its 300th issue. It broke the record of the longest running indie comic in the history of comic books. And the same week that book came out, there was a brand new Spider-Man issue written by J.J. Abrams and his son. And Spawn 300 shattered that book in sales. Like, that book had no chance. And the funny thing is, Spawn is interesting. Like, everybody knows the name, but you're right, nobody's really talking about the book. But people who are reading the book, and now there's 4 Spawn titles entirely, and they're all closely interlocked and linked. So everyone who's reading them, including myself, has been enjoying them. And there have been some points where I've actually jumped off of the wagon and not really reading the book. And then there's a point in time where everybody's saying, like, here's a new story arc. If you want to get back into reading, you should read it again. So you go back on the book. So what I like so much about Spawn is that there are parts where you can just take a break, and then there are parts where you can get back on again. Like, there's really great jumping on and off points. DC and Marvel have those to a certain degree, but it's really hard to figure out where they are. Basically, these days, if I'm going to jump off of a book in DC or Marvel, it's basically when the writer that I like is being thrown off the book for a new writing team, or I finish a story arc and I'm just like, I'm done. You know, because my attitude is, if I am going to start a comic, I want to give, especially if it's not going to be a mini or a maxi series, if it's going to be an ongoing, I want to at least read one story arc. If I like it, I'm going to continue reading. If I don't like it, or if I feel like I've been satisfied, I'll drop off. I don't necessarily feel you could do the same with manga, because manga is always like an ongoing story unless I'm wrong.
But you can drop off at any point with manga too. Like, I do a whole series on my channel where I try 3 volumes of a manga series and I decide if I'm going to keep going or not. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. It just depends on the series.
Right.
Because that way I get a good sample of what the story is and where it's headed in 3 volumes usually.
Mm-hmm.
I actually just filmed another one today. That's why that's fresh on my mind. But yes, so that's the other thing, is length of story. Sometimes manga will end up being shorter, where it's only 1 volume and you're done, kind of like a single trade like Twig, but you don't have to wait for all the chapters to come out and then be published. Essentially, well, at least us here in the US, we just get notice, oh, we're getting a single volume of this title, it'll be out this time. So it's interesting. It's just very, very different. The way they run is different, so I find it very interesting. But we should probably kind of wrap things up and wind down. We've been talking for about an hour.
Yeah.
So I think the manga boom is not necessarily going to completely dive off, but I do think the pendulum will swing back a little bit, because as these manga readers start to find all the tropes that they like and they feel like they're reading the same story, the chances of them swinging over and picking up comics is much higher. So I do think it's just like a temporary swing that will swing back in time, but it's going to be people going to places like Image and Boom and some of the other indie companies, maybe even Dark Horse, because
Dark Horse is doing well. I mean, Dynamite and Boom Studios are probably 2 of the better indie companies outside of Image right now, especially because of the fact that they're the ones that are really doing the franchising. I mean, last month, one of the top selling comics was Gargoyles issue #1, the Disney characters, because it captured all those people. I mean, Cammy, our colleague here, is reading Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Saturday Morning Adventures. Very popular book because it's got all the turtle fans, and that's also a great thing for younger and new fans to read something cool and nostalgic, because everybody knows the Turtles, everybody knows the Power Rangers. These are great books that can really capture new readers. But what really needs to happen in order for Western comics to not completely die out, Marvel and DC really needs to go back to their roots, and they really have to start going back to figuring out what was it that made them so popular. And they sometimes they really got to just take a look at who's writing and who's drawing their books. Like, give us a good writer, give us a good artist, and give us a good story. That's what everybody wants. I think what's really interesting is in DC, one of the most well-written comics in DC right now is a comic that nobody's reading. And I myself was one of them. And I started reading it because my comic book store manager just gave me a copy of this one issue of The Flash. That's what it is. And he said, read this book. I think you'll like it. The guy who's writing it is a guy named Jeremy Adams. He's apparently just having fun. So I've been reading The Flash since I got that free book, and I've been really enjoying it, to the point where I found out that they're going to be doing a brand new Green Lantern run, and this writer of The Flash, Jeremy Adams, is going to be writing Green Lantern. So I'm like, okay, he did a great job with The Flash. I'm going to read Green Lantern. So I feel that that's a great thing that's happening right now. Like, they're finally realizing, you know, here are the writers, the young writers, the new writers that people are enjoying. Let's have them write some more books. So I think that's another reason why they're finally starting to realize that we need to get back to all of this. I mean, I think a big announcement was just dropped today that Marvel is going to be bringing Jonathan Hickman back and bringing their Ultimate Universe back, which gave us Miles Morales. Very excited a lot of people are right now for June. So that's a good thing to know. The fact that they're going to be making a brand new miniseries revolving around Miles Morales, who's a very popular character who is not being written well right now. So Jonathan Hickman, big name, great writer. His Fantastic Four run may be one of the greatest Fantastic Four runs I ever read. He's going to write Miles Morales. I'm on board.
April, do you have any kind of final thoughts here on the manga boom and what that means?
No, I think you covered it pretty well. I think we're gonna ride the top of this wave at some point, and we're gonna start to see a swing, and hopefully we can match some of the good stories that are coming out of Japan and Korea and that side of the world.
Manhwa is a whole different discussion. We'll have to talk about that another day.
I just want both communities to continue to talk to each other and find out all the good things from both sides, because that's how both groups are going to be successful. I want East and West to be friends, and I want us all to suggest and recommend things. But the most important thing I think we all can agree on is we all just have to make sure that we have the money to pay for it.
Exactly. So thank you guys for checking out this video. I hope you enjoyed our discussion on the manga boom. Let us know in the comments down below what you feel about this. Tell us your thoughts and feelings. We'll engage with you in the comments. And thank you again to April and Steve for joining me in this conversation. And we will see you guys in the next one.
Sounds good to me.
Bye.
Bye-bye.